It's great to be here. Thank you for letting me be a part of this. I've been turning over in my mind all morning. Is it possible that an Italian boy from Ohio and a German boy from Pennsylvania could be twins separated at birth? Al Caperna and I have so much life experience and so much perspective in common. It's really quite extraordinary. I've been enjoying that. What I wanted to talk about today was the question of how do you evaluate success in your calling? I think there's a lot of confusion in this area, and it's an issue that I've really wrestled with a lot personally, and would like to share with you what I think the Lord has told me about it. Now, our common calling, and I think Al kind of referred to this, and Tom as well, man's chief end is to glorify God and to enjoy Him forever. So honoring God is our calling, but there's a second part to that, a second dimension, and that's enjoying Him thoroughly as we honor Him. My personal calling, and it's been amusing to me, I haven't probably met 15 or 20 of you here, but it appears the room is filled with a lot of serial entrepreneurs, which has been my calling. And I recognize that in my early 20s and have been pursuing it with abandon since. I've started 13 commercial companies at this point. Half of them have grown to between $50 and $200 million in value. I have had an odd hobby. Some people play golf, some people sail or fish or hunt. A lot of my spare time in my adult life has been spent going to the poor of the world, helping them start businesses to become self-sustaining. So I've started dozens of businesses. I think I lose track of the number. It's in excess of 80 in 45 countries and 5 or 6 inner cities to try to help the poor using my startup entrepreneur skills to serve the poor. I laughingly say I never finish anything. And I'm going to get myself in real hot water with Tom here. If Al was brave in talking about himself as an elder in the marketplace, I actually, through the years, have gotten more and more feeling that in some sense, my calling is apostolic. I hate to say that. I haven't really said that in public, but if you look at the verse we have there, 1 Corinthians 3:10, says, by the grace of God that God has given me, I laid a foundation and someone else is building on it, but each must build with care. So I'm a foundation layer. I go out onto the frontier, think new ideas, and lay foundations. Other people finish them. The second part of my calling has been that I've really felt like God has given me a gift of generosity and a desire to build the kingdom. I didn't want to wait until I was dead to give money. I've been very anxious to give it in real time. In my mid-20s, I decided that I really wanted to live my life where I could give 50% of my earnings and 50% of my time to direct kingdom work. Some years I do less, some years I do more on the financial side, but that's worked out as a pretty good average through the years. In addition, I've started several public foundations that have had about $1 billion of total impact. I've been an advisor on several $1 billion, $3 to $4 billion of charitable gifts. A verse that really impacted me in my early development was 1 John 3:17 and 18, the two verses there. If anyone has the world's goods and sees his brother in need, yet closes his heart against him, how does God's love abide in him? And so I really felt like the Lord made that verse very real to me. So how do you measure success? Is money the right measure? Unfortunately, I think for a great number of people that feels like the right measure. Many, many times I've heard people say, God blessed me, I made millions of dollars. I would contend that those two statements are not connected. Sometimes money can be a byproduct of obedience. Sometimes it can be an outright curse. The 1 Timothy 5:9 says that many people are led astray by the desire for riches. And so wealth can be a sign of God's blessing. If it is, you need to use it to His glory. it can be something that leads you off track. If money is a measure of success, then was Jesus a success? He had no money, he had no home, he died on a cross. Was Mother Teresa a success? She was penniless, she was unmarried, she lived in one of the worst places on earth in Calcutta. Was Howard Hughes a success? He was wealthy, but he was friendless, he had broken marriages and relationships in his wake, he was paranoid, he was addicted. Money is not an adequate measure of success. Is reputation, fame, a measure of success? A friend of mine recently said to me that ego is edging God out. I think many people live for ego satisfaction, and that is not an adequate measure of success. John the Baptist declared that Christ must increase, but I must decrease. In Galatians, Paul said that if I'm trying to please people, I'm not a servant of Christ. So I would contend that reputation and fame are not a measure of success. Is hard work a measure of success? In Psalm 127, it says, unless the Lord builds the house, the builders labor in vain. It's useless for you to work so hard from early morning to late at night, anxiously working for food to eat. Hard work is necessary, but it is not the measure of success. I think a lot of us, myself included, sometimes take pride in how hard we have worked. But in and of itself, that doesn't determine whether we're a success or not. It's a necessary but not a sufficient condition for success. Every one of my businesses, and Al was talking about this before, I have had to develop a sense of humor about my business life. Because in many, many instances, I've worked very hard down a certain path and just hit a brick wall. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, the solution appears. And I have to just laugh and say, God is good, that He did things in a way that I really couldn't take a lot of credit for it. Diligence is important, but it doesn't guarantee success. Proverbs 28:26 says, those who trust in themselves are fools, but those who walk in wisdom are kept safe. For those of us who are businessmen who have our own businesses, it's pretty easy to trust in yourself. You get pretty confident, you know what you're doing, and can make things happen. And God's saying, really, that's the path of folly, that we need to walk in wisdom. So what does it mean to walk in wisdom? For me, these two verses, Psalm 37:4 and 5, have been really a major highlight of my life. Psalm 37:4 says, take delight in the Lord and He'll give you your heart's desires. So how do I delight myself in the Lord? Well, how do you delight yourself in your spouse or your children? You find out what pleases them and then do it. 1 John 3:22 says that if we keep God's commands, we please Him. And so we have to invest ourselves in getting to know what pleases Him and then do it for Him. The promise attached to that is that He'll give us the desire of our heart. He wants us to live from our hearts, not just from our heads. He doesn't want us to be chasing things that we think are good ideas. He wants us to live out of the overflow of our hearts. So to do that, we need to find out what God has equipped us to do well, take deep pleasure in doing it to the best of our ability. John Piper talks about Christian hedonism, that if we please God, we optimize our own pleasure. And I really believe that. When we find what God has designed us to do and do it with our whole heart, then we get the pleasure that God intended. Is this promise of Psalm 37:4 a blank check from God? He says He'll give us the desire of our heart. From time to time, my heart doesn't desire the right thing. So the way that promise works in my life is that periodically God has to correct my heart. He has to change my heart to desire what He wants me to desire. So instead of giving me what I asked for, He gives me what's best for me and changes me so that I really wanted what He gave me. Psalm 12:2 talks about being transformed, letting our minds be transformed in order that we confirm the will of God in our lives. Second part of walking in wisdom, commit your way unto the Lord, trust also in him, and he shall bring it to pass. Psalm 37:5. Commit your way unto the Lord. That means all-out commitment. My life goal is to reach heaven with my hands empty. I want to be able to look my Lord in the face and say to him, everything you gave me, I have expended for your glory. I've not withheld anything. I'm sure I'm not going to be able to fulfill that, but my prayer is that I can come as close as possible to that. I don't want to leave anything on the table. I don't want to reach heaven and say, Lord, I was holding a lot in reserve because I really didn't trust you to take care of me. I want to spend of myself to the absolute limit. Trust in him. If we want God-sized results, we've got to rely on his resources. If you plan within the limit of your own resources, you'll have man-sized results. And I think for any of us who've had any success in business, there's a temptation to want to then plan your life out within the limits of your resources. I pray on a regular basis as to where the dividing line is between faith and presumption. I don't want to test God. I don't want to, leap off the top of the building and say, angels, come bear me up. But on the other hand, I don't want to be just limited to my own resources. I want there to be some exercise in faith as how I move forward. I always want my reach to exceed my grasp. I always want to be reaching for things that require God to show up. I don't want to live my life just in the narrow boundaries of my own capabilities. The last part of Psalm 37:5, it says, he shall bring it to pass, not me. And that's a pretty critical thing to reflect on, is that the results are his department, not mine. If you're trying to measure the success of the outcomes of your life, and it's not money, and it's not reputation, and it's not hard work, then how do we get there? Jeremiah 5's famous passage, it says, let us fear the Lord our God, who gives autumn and spring rains in season, who assures us of the regular weeks of harvest. In 1 Corinthians 3:7, Paul says something very similar. Neither he who plants nor he who waters is anything, but only God who gives the growth. One of the things that we as Christian businessmen have got to acknowledge is that God is the Lord of the harvest, that I'm not responsible for outcomes. I'm responsible for inputs. I'm responsible to faithfully do what the Lord has told me to do, to use the resources at my disposal to his glory. But the outcome is his business. I cannot guarantee. I've seen some brilliant people who have done things that didn't work out well. I've seen some complete idiots who've done very well in life, and you wonder how it happened. And there's no correlation. It's the Lord who decides what the result of your effort is going to be. That we can sow and we can water, but the harvest is in his hands. I don't know whether you all remember, but in the presidential campaign, President Obama stirred up a big controversy. He made a comment and he said, if you've got a business, you didn't build that. Somebody else made that happen. And there was just this huge cry that rose up from the business community. And he, in context, meant that somebody else who helped it happen was government. You had an assist from government. And there was some truth to that statement. But as a Christian, I have to say that he was on the right track. He just missed the point. The point is that the something else that makes our business happen is God. He's the source of any success, any harvest that we make. And we need to acknowledge that. The idea of the self-made millionaire is a total fiction. It's a fabrication of our minds. It's not reality. So if we can't say that the outcome's within our control, then our performance evaluation has to relate to our inputs. Again, I'm going down a similar track to what Al did, but the starting place is that we have to start by being diligent to know God. Our daily Bible study, our daily prayer, Barbara, your comments were right on target. I love Bill Hybels' book, Too Busy Not to Pray. It's a quote from Martin Luther, who said that he sometimes woke up in the morning and had so many things to accomplish in the day that he spent an extra hour in prayer. We have to start from a position of saying we need to know God, and that occurs through our prayer and through our Bible study and in close relationships with godly companions. We need the band of brothers that Al referred to, the church as Tom describes it. If we think that we can successfully navigate our way through life solo, we're in trouble. Then once we've put our focus on God, we need to do some self-evaluation and find out what we're wired for. What energizes you? What do you do well? Normally, those are the things that God has given you as a calling to pursue with all your being. So our success is going to be measured by how well do we know God, how clearly have we been able to see His design in our life, and how faithfully have we been in executing on it. So hearing my orders, following them well, being utterly sold out for excelling for my master. That's the pattern of success. C.S. Lewis wrote an interesting comment. He said that in God's efforts to get permanent possessions of a soul, He relies on the troughs even more than on the peaks. Some of His special favorites have gone through longer and deeper troughs than anyone else. Again, the world would have us say, if you're fabulously successful riding the crest of the wave, then you're obviously a success and all is well. I would tell you that the most fruitful times in my life have often been the troughs. Just thinking about this in the history of the church, John Bunyan, the writer of Pilgrim's Progress, this didn't get changed. So it's not referring to Jesus there. That was supposed to be corrected in this version, but that's the subpoint there is wrong. John Bunyan wrote Pilgrim's Progress 337 years ago. Tens of millions of people have benefited from it. But he spent 15 years of his adult life in prison. He died penniless. You look at his life at the perspective of the day of his death, and you'd have said there wasn't success there. David Brainerd died at 29 of tuberculosis. He was a missionary, a pioneer missionary to the American Indians in New England. After his death, he was cared for in his death by the daughter of Jonathan Edwards, and in his effects when he died, she found a journal that he had been keeping while he was out ministering to the Indians. The Edwards family published it after his death, and that book was instrumental in starting the whole 19th century missionary movement, that thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people found their way to the mission field because of David Brainerd. But again, if you'd looked at his life at the date of death, you'd have said it was not a successful one. I'd have to tell you that in my own business career, I've had substantial success, but that my impact in the lives of people, pointing people toward Jesus, has been much more serious when I've been going through difficulties. When people see me keep my balance and remain cheerful and positive and hopeful in the midst of the world crashing around me, I've had much more impact for the kingdom. And it's been in the troughs that I've seen the Lord use me to the greatest extent. And frankly, over time, the size and the difficulty of the challenges increased, not decreased. I really, at one point, thought, life's going to get easier. In point of fact, God has put bigger tasks in me that have resulted in bigger challenges. This solar company, I'm 7 years into it and $30 million into it. It's been the hardest challenge of my business life. I still believe that God has given us, as Al referred to it, the secrets of earth. We've made a major breakthrough technically, but the struggle to maintain it and move it forward has been brutal. And yet I really believe it's been a very rich time from a ministry point of view. I want to play a clip here. I'm not quite sure how you activate the clip here. Well, that's an interesting question. I don't know whether the technical folks can tell me how to do this or not. This is a clip from Chariots of Fire. Whoops, that's not the way they do it. If I press forward, I think I lose. Yeah. Well, we may have to lose it here. I don't know how many of you are intimately familiar with Chariots of Fire, but Eric Liddell, Scotsman from a missionary family from China, as a young man discovered that he could run fast. And there was an argument with his family over whether it was worldly to become an athlete. Ultimately, he qualified for the Olympics for England, went and got to the Olympics and found that his event was running on Sunday and that he didn't want to break the Sabbath by running. Ultimately, he had an opportunity to run in the 400 meters instead of the 100 meters and won. Al quoted this, so he had anticipated me on this, but one of the richest comments in my life is the comment, and it is a quote from Liddell. And he said to his sister in arguing about his athletic career, God made me for a purpose. He also made me fast. When I run, I feel his pleasure. Really, really profound thing. When Chariots of Fire came out, I was 28 years old. I was still trying to sort through this question of calling and success. And Liddell's words just spoke to my heart incredibly. In this clip that we would have seen, he asks the question, where does the power come from to see the race to the end? And he says it comes from within, from the indwelling Spirit of God. Find the purpose which God created you, optimize your gifts, feel his pleasure. That's the secret to life as far as I'm concerned. I feel God's pleasure when I'm excellent in the business world. I feel God's approval that I'm doing what he designed me to do. When you see Liddell run, I don't know how many of you remember this, but it's kind of bizarre. He breaks every rule of style in running. He throws his chest out and his head back, and you can just see him exulting in his running. He's carried away with the joy of pleasing God, doing what God made him to do. The way he did it is flawed, but the result was God's creation. So much of what I do in the business world I know is flawed, but I still feel his pleasure as I throw myself into it wholeheartedly and do what he made me to do. I feel sorry for people who think that business is for making money. Business is for pleasing God. Business is for the purpose of doing our very best with whatever God's put in front of us and feeling his pleasure as you do it. The money may follow, and if it does, wonderful. Use it again to his glory. But the point of the whole exercise is to honor him, to please him. I don't know how many of you know the last chapter of Eric Liddell's life. He was in his late 30s. He was a father with 3 young children. He got separated from his children. The Japanese invaded China, where he was a missionary, and they rounded up all of the Western missionaries and put them into a prison camp. But the Japanese were very short of manpower, and so they guarded the periphery of the camp, but they allowed the inmates to run the camp. So this is a place called Shantung Compound. There's a Harvard academic by the name of Langdon Gilkey who wrote an account of this. And the group that was inside the prison camp was 1/3 Catholic monks and nuns that came from a Trappist monastery where they had been subject to a vow of silence, and they thought the prison camp was a holiday because they were released from their vow of silence. So they were pretty cheerful. 1/3 of the people in the prison camp were evangelical missionaries, and 1/3 were businessmen and academics from a secular background. It was a tragic story because everybody, it was like Lord of the Flies. It was each man for himself. Selfishness became the king inside the camp. It was even the missionaries, the evangelical Christians who had all the theology in the world, when put in this situation, could think of nothing but their own self-interest. So the children were becoming gangsters. They were destroying property, they were stealing, sexual promiscuity was becoming a problem even with relatively young children, and the camp was just running amok. It was horrible. Eric Little was one of the missionaries interned there, and he came forward to the council at the camp and said, "I'll take responsibility for all the children." And so he took them in hand, and he got them doing sports and music and drama, and he gave them Bible teaching, and immediately all of the problems with the children disappeared. He poured himself into the children day and night. What the people in the camp didn't know was that he had a brain tumor and was dying. He was experiencing excruciating headaches and was in very bad shape. And so here he was, a dying man who could have been thinking about himself. Instead, he poured himself out for these children. He died about a week before liberation of the camp. But he was in full pursuit of his calling. He was using his best for God's glory. So the Olympic champion and the dying youth leader are both bearing the stamp of success, that they both were giving wholehearted obedience to what God had called them to do. You look at the two episodes and they don't look equally glorious, but in reality, that's what we see. So, in summary, what I would tell you is that success is defined: delight in the Lord, find your heart's desire in your calling, give it your all, withhold nothing, and God's Spirit will produce God-sized results. My final word is that I really would pray that your life would require a supernatural explanation. At the date of my death, I hope people who come to my funeral won't say, "What a good man he was." I hope they're going to say, "What a God he must have worshiped, because I can't explain his life in any other terms than God." That he lived beyond the limits of his own capacity. There must have been a God in the background there, because none of this would have happened otherwise. I really believe that that's the measure of success. And look forward to hearing tales from you all as you experience success in God's terms. Thank you.